Hello, welcome to another episode of Webcam Sessions. Today we're going to be talking about something that kind of actually continues off of the first episode, which was talking about moving chords. We talked a lot in that first episode about how to make sure that you're moving your fingers very efficiently and articulately to go between chord progressions. What we're going to be working on here today is actually a tool that you want to use when chords are quite different and you're trying to switch between chords that kind of have nothing to do with each other. And so we're going to start here with a technique that I like to call the open switch. And what the open switch is exactly what it sounds like. When you're switching between chords, you play all open on the ukulele. So when we pick up our ukes, we can take a very basic chord as a great example for this. Let's use a G chord. And to play a G, we place our index finger on the second fret of the C string, our ring finger on the third fret of the E string, and our middle finger here on the second fret of the A. Right? So our G chord sounds something like that, right? Nice and simple. Sometimes though, when we're playing a G chord, when we're going to it, for instance, it's a little bit of a bear because it uses the three different fingers and it can be tricky to get all three fingers there in time. And so a tool that we can do essentially is whenever we're going to and from chords, we actually, on the very last strum motion we make before the switch, we play all open on our ukuleles. And with the G chord, if we play all open and then play the G, we can create this kind of dipping sound that really works well to transition between chords as well as create this, unique type of vibe. So we're going to work on a very basic example with this. We're going to play our G chord and we're going to play down, up, down with the G chord. And then on an up strum after that last down, instead of playing the G again, we're going to play all open on our ukulele and then go right back into it. So essentially we have down, up, where on the down, up, down, we're playing the G, and then on the up, we're going to play all open and then repeat it. So then another down on the G, followed by an up on the open, etc. Let's go ahead and try this together a couple times. So we'll start with the G chord. We're going to go down, and now up, remove our fingers, up, and now back down on the G. Down, up, 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 down, up. So you can hear it really creates this almost nice little dipping sound where the sound kind of goes down and comes back up upon the resolution back to the G chord. So if we're just vamping on a G chord here, this can be a really cool sound. But the primary purpose of this is for when we're switching chords. So let's do a chord that's very different than G. Let's do an F. And how we play an F is take our middle finger, place on the second fret of the G string, and our index finger placed on the first fret of the E string, right? So our F sounds something like that. Now, the difference between F and G is huge. Now, many of you might be already comfortable with this transition because it's one of the most common ones we use in music. But, even if you've been doing it for a while, you can appreciate that it wasn't easy at first to get down. And the reason is because all three of our fingers from the G chord have to switch positions to the F. The F only uses two fingers, so obviously the ring finger here is not even used, but you'll see our index finger has to go down to the first fret on the E string, our middle finger has to come all the way up to the second fret on the G, and our ring finger comes completely off. So it's a pretty tricky little transition. So what we can do is on the up strum between the transition, we can play all open, remove our fingers off, and get ready to then place our fingers back down with that down strum. So let's try this. Let's play the G chord, and we're going to go down, up, down on the G. We're going to come up with all open, and then we're going to go down, up, down on the F, and then come up on all open, back to the G, kind of rinse and repeat a few times. So let's go and try this. Starting with our G chord, we have down, up, 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 down, up. So this gives me a little bit more time to make that switch to the chord. Now, if you're having trouble holding up the ukulele between this because you're removing your fingers, the second episode of this series, we talked about keeping our thumb in different positions depending on what we're playing. And this technique of keeping our thumb more up and cradling the ukulele more in our hand is obviously going to benefit this style of playing more because we're trying to release our fingers off of the strings entirely. So if you haven't already, please check out that second episode so that you can get comfortable holding the uke to facilitate these changes. So just going between the G and the F, you can see how this technique can help speed it up, but also give it more of a unique sound too, right? That sort of sounds good and really makes the transitions between the chords a little bit easier to do. Now, to talk very, very briefly with some music theory here, when we play the all open strings, we are playing a G, C, E, and A note. And so if we're playing in a key where G, C, E, or A are very what we call dissonant or not necessarily in the key, sometimes it will sound very bad to use this technique. So it tends to work best with keys that utilize G, C, E, and A as notes that are part of the key. And the easiest way to check that is to just try it. And if it sounds good, go with it. If it sounds terrible, it probably won't be a good technique to use. For instance, if we do this in the key of E minor, and I play an E minor chord, which is 0, 4, 3, 2, ring finger on 4th fret of the C string, middle finger on 3rd fret of the E, and index on 2nd fret of the A, if I do something like this, that sounds pretty good, right? But if I'm playing in the key of F minor, and I play one of my favorite chords on the uke, an F minor add 9, which is just taking an E minor chord and moving it up 1 fret. That's all you got to do. So the 5th fret here at the ring finger on the C, 4th fret here on the E with the middle, and 3rd fret here on the A with your index. If I do the same thing, it doesn't sound quite right. When you listen to this chord, and then you listen to it, it just really doesn't blend well. And the reason is in this key of F minor, we've got an A flat note here, which doesn't blend well with that A natural, and it's a technique that works better in some keys than others. So be sure to kind of experiment with it to see what you like for the sound. Now, the next step here is actually doing the open switch in different ways. And we're essentially doing it on an up strum as we switch into a new chord, right? But sometimes we can do it on that up, and instead of going right down into the next chord, we can use our fretting hand to actually hammer on into the next chord as we switch. And when we do this hammer on, instead of striking the strings downward with our strumming hand, we will miss the strings and let the hammer on carry over to create the sound. This is one of my all-time favorite blues techniques, for instance. And so we're actually going to learn it with a little blues chord right now so that you can really hear what this sounds. So we're going to do an A7 chord. Just take your index finger, place on the 1st fret of the C string. That's all there is to it. Now when we do the open switch normally, we would do something like down, up, down, right? Where we're doing down, up, down on the A7, up, all open, followed by the same thing repeated. And that would sound like great, right? But let's blues it up a little bit more. And what we're going to do is when we come up on the open switch, and we're all open, as we would then go down and play the A7, instead, I'm going to take my index finger, I'm going to hammer on to the 1st fret of the C string. And remember, whenever you're doing a hammer on, you want to make sure you're using the tip of the finger and applying quite a bit of force to the string. You also want to try to be as close to the fret wire as possible to really maximize the tone and kind of ease of doing that hammer on. So make sure when you're doing the hammer on, it's nice and level and close to the fret, and you'll get a good tone. So now I'm going to do the open switch, followed by a hammer on while missing down with my hand. And that's a pretty tricky, a bit of this type of thing, but it really sounds good. So now instead of going down, and then coming up on the open switch followed by another down, I'm actually going to miss on the down to repeat it. So let's start with the open switch, do the hammer on, miss as we're doing the hammer on, and then continue the pattern. Sounds really complicated, but as we practice it here, it should make more and more sense. So open switch, hammer on, up, down, open switch, hammer on, up, down, right? So sounds something like this. You'll hear that's much more bluesy, gives a little bit more of that kind of swinging type of feel, and that hammer-on really adds another layer. Just to break it down one more time, what I'm doing is when I'm switching to a chord, such as this A7, I'm going to precede it with an up strum all open. And then when I would normally down strum into that new chord, I'm instead going to miss the strings on the down while simultaneously hammering on into the chord, allowing that previous open switch to continue ringing with that hammer on. And then I'm going to resume my pattern as normal. So as soon as I do that miss, I might go up, down, or whatever else for the pattern that I'm trying to accomplish. So this technique is really, really good in blues. And to kind of give you an idea of doing an open switch in a blues format with this A7 chord, I'm going to give a 4-beat pattern here on A7, and I'm going to open switch into it each time, which just means at the beginning of the measure, I'm going to go all open at the very end, and in the beginning, hammer on and miss instead of striking the strings. Sounds something like this. If I were to continue with a blues, I could maybe go to my D7, which will be 2-0-2-0, which I'll use my middle finger here on the 2nd fret of the G string and my ring finger here on the 2nd fret of the E, and maybe I'll do the same sort of thing. Back to the A. Now the E7, and what that is 1st fret here on the G string with my index finger, 2nd fret here on the C string with my middle, and 2nd fret here on the A with my ring. Maybe go back to the D7, back to the A7, back to the E7. Creates a really cool sound, right? So it's something that you want to try playing around with to create that kind of hammer-on feel utilizing the open switch. It's not limited to just this blues style either. Let's take like that G chord that we started with. The G is very difficult because when we do a hammer on the G, we're hammering 3 fingers on 3 strings, which is not an easy task, but really cool thing to work on. So now maybe I go all open, followed by the miss, but hammer on these 3 fingers. Really cool sound. Now, that hammer-on's tricky, and a little tip there is you want to make sure that each one of these fingers is comfortable doing a hammer-on before you try to do all 3 simultaneously. It takes a little bit of practice, but again, really cool sound. And now if I do that with like the G to F chord, really cool. So one thing to really just drive home with this, because it's so easy to make this mistake, is make sure that you miss the strings coming down with your strumming hand as you do the hammer-on. And it's weird because it's doing 2 different motions at the same time. It feels a bit like this, but it's really important because if you don't make that motion going down as you do the hammer-on, you're going to be stuck up here when you're trying to then come back up. And it's easy to kind of jump and do something like this where it's like, and that's going to get your rhythm all out of whack. And so if you're having trouble keeping your hand moving like that, be sure to check out my ultimate ukulele strumming course that I did with Ukulele Underground, because it really talks about how to make sure that your hand is always moving and getting rhythms really, really comfortable. And some of these concepts are touched on in that, but this technique is pretty unique to this video series. So be sure to check that out. We also just did a finger picking workshop online, and that's now actually available to be purchased and downloaded. It's kind of the replay of the live workshop that teaches 4-finger picking and how to create your own picking patterns, and I had a lot of fun doing it. Please check it out. It's a lot of fun to kind of look at finger picking in this way, because you can create your own patterns using this kind of device. And so for more information, more lessons, everything else, please check out my website, which you'll see right here. It's mattukulele.com, where you can find lots more videos. And stay tuned here for new episodes of Webcam Sessions, which will come out each and every week. And thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you next time.